Welcome to another edition of Danny Brown Talks Phoenix. I am your host, Danny Brown, and this is our January market update. And as always, I am joined by Garret Cerkvenik of JFQ Lending. Welcome, Garret.
Thank you.
All right, so this is our January market update. So give us a little information on what's taken place over the last month or so in the lending world with the government shutdown and just kind of all of that.
Okay. So the short answer is not much. The government shutdown didn't really impact interest rates. It impacted processing a little bit. Social Security Administration, a little harder to verify, things there. The IRS, obviously verifying, income. So it slowed things down there, but we didn't see, a big change in interest rates because of it. What has changed, and this kind of was, I think we might have touched on this last month, but, the Fed really has slowed down interest rates. They were through 2018, they were, increasing every quarter. And so the thought was that they were going to increase through 2019. We were supposed to have 3 more rate increases initially, and they've decided to kind of pull back on that.
I mean, they made it pretty clear that they were going to continue to increase rates, and with everything that's taken place in the economy and the slowdown, they've really backed off of that.
They have. And it's not to say that that's going to change. They just, I think they were pushing it a little too fast, and a lot of people wanted it to slow. Rates, we saw the biggest increase that we've seen in a long time.
We were pushing 5s.
We were pushing 6s. People with great credit and 20% equity were getting rates in the 5% range on a 30-year fixed. So it's something where I think it's good that they pulled back a little bit. Rates are still, higher than they've been over the last 10 years, but they definitely crept back down a little bit. If you have good credit, you can still get rates down into those low 4s, even high 3s in some cases again.
Wow.
Which is something we really didn't see throughout 2018. So rates are in a good spot. A few other changes that happened at the beginning of the year that, we already knew were going to happen. Conventional and FHA loan limits went up. So here in Arizona, the conventional loan limit went up to $484,000 and change.
That's great.
FHA went to $314,000. So it really gives people the ability to buy at a higher price point, as the market increases, and do so without having to meet jumbo guidelines, without having to put larger down payments down. It gives people a little more flexibility with programs and things like that. So it's a great time to buy or refinance because rates have hit a little bit of a low point. And there's a lot of flexibility in there. So It's definitely something to look at, if you're in the market.
Do you think that rates will probably stay kind of flat for the time being?
I do. I think rates fluctuate on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
But, when you hear that rates are fluctuating, it's not necessarily the rates that change, it's the cost for each rate. Mm-hmm. So if rates go up one day, it's not that you still can't get the same rates as the day before. It's just that you're going to spend a little bit more to get it. Same thing if they go down. You can, throughout the entire year of 2018, you've been able to get a rate at 3.75, for instance, on a 30-year fixed. At the beginning of 2018, you might not have really paid much for it. At the end of 2018, you would have paid an arm and a leg, but it was still out there. I think rates are going to stay flat. I think, we'll see the same or maybe even a little bit lower rates by the end of the year. I could be completely wrong, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of movement in 2019. We're still kind of figuring out this economy and figuring out where things are going to go. So
yeah, I think this is just a testament that nobody really knows what the future looks like.
Yes.
Just a few months ago we were talking about how the Fed was continuing to raise rates and get off the fence if you're on the fence, and then all of a sudden they pull back. So we just have no idea what the future is going to hold and what the Fed ends up planning on doing. So I think that just goes to reinforce the fact that you should not try to time anything. You should make purchases, sell your home, do those things when it makes sense for you and the time is right for you personally.
Absolutely. And Here's the thing. Let's say you buy at a high point and rates go down. Refinance. We have clients that refinance for 0.25%, an eighth of a percent, 0.5%, because they can typically get those small reductions with no closing costs. So
yeah, I mean, the old adage was unless you can get your rate down by 1%,
it was 2% way
you
back
shouldn't
in the day,
refinance, and now that's gone.
It's gone. You really just have to look at the long term. We do no cost refinances for people every day. And so if you're getting 0.25%, and you're not paying for it, then take it. It'll save you $15,000 over the life of your loan. And that way you can do these small incremental drops without losing your equity and without paying out of pocket, and still, get a rate that you might have gotten had you locked in at a slightly lower time.
So I think the impact on the rates that we talked about towards the end of the year, how they were going up consistently, has really impacted the real estate market. This January January is typically a slow month for real estate in general because we're coming out of the holidays. It's usually super predictable, but this January was extremely slow nationwide. Phoenix in particular, closings were down almost 12% from this time last year, so last January, and active listings were 11% higher at the start of this February versus February last year. So we saw less closings and more listings take place this year than we have in previous years. So I think that is a direct result of how aggressive the Fed was being with interest rates and how quickly they were increasing them. I think it scared a lot of people. Instead of getting into the market, it drove them, out of the market.
Gotcha.
But what we're seeing is that's kind of shifting. Even though January was a dramatically slower month than normal, we are getting back into kind of the seasonal norms. So February, even in our own business, we had one closing in the month of January, which is very abnormal for us. But in February and going into March, our closings are much higher and back to normal. So we're seeing it in action that the market is kind of correcting itself and kind of getting back to normal. So
would you consider it still a seller's market, or do
absolutely.
you think it's balanced now?
Yeah, so we've been in a seller's market for a very, very long time. And I think that we're going to continue to be in a seller's market because we have such a long way to go to get to a buyer's market. So a lot of people have fear that all of a sudden we're just going to shift and now it's a buyer's market. And in some price ranges, it absolutely is. So your luxury market, it's a buyer's market. But in your regular average person market, it's still a bit of a seller's market. And I think that we're going to continue to stay there. What we are seeing in the market is price reductions, more price reductions than we ever have seen, but we're not seeing reductions in sales prices. So what that means is that most sellers were riding this high from 2017 or 2018 rather, and pricing aggressively. So if your neighbor down the street sold for $300,000 2 months ago, well, I'm going to list it at $315 or $325 and get it with no problem. Well, that's not the case. So because of supply and demand, there's now more supply in the market and demand's relatively the same. Those list prices are coming down. But the good thing is, and the point that I always like to reiterate, is that the sales prices aren't dropping.
So how is that though? So because if list prices are coming down, you would think that the sale prices would come down with them. Were people just taking big reductions off of what they were listing for?
Yes.
Okay.
So they were pricing it way too high because they were continuing to ride that train of increased property values. Again, going back to, if your neighbor sold a few months ago and now I'm selling, I'm going to list it substantially higher than where they were.
But they were still getting that 300 or whatever.
Yeah. But they were getting it, but now not anymore. So they're having to do price reductions to get down to what makes sense for buyers. So we're still seeing price increases and home value increases, just not as dramatically as we were.
Got it.
And actually the first time since 2006, I believe, we're actually seeing... since 2012, we're actually seeing people's income increase more than property values, which is awesome. That's really good. That really is a healthy sign for the real estate market because that directly impacts people's affordability.
Gotcha.
You want people's income to increase faster than the value of homes so that they can buy those homes.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. And in fact, I've got a quote here from the chief economist from the National Association of Realtors. He says, the softening home price appreciation will continue in the upcoming months as housing inventory builds, but is unlikely for the national median home price to actually decline given the housing shortage of moderately priced homes and from job additions in the economy. So what he's saying is the same thing I'm saying, is that the average sales price of a home is not going to go down because of the strength of the economy and because
people are making
more money and can afford more. Exactly. Yeah. So I think that with the increase in FHA, how much you can borrow on FHA loans as well as conventional loans, that's all going to be really impactful for 2019. And I think that we're going to continue to see a really great real estate market as we get further into the year.
Good.
So we started off slow, but things seem to be kind of getting back to normal, and activity in Phoenix is really picking up. So,
do you think, one thing I was going to ask about, one I read recently, was about how more people are working on the wholesale side versus the retail side. And what that means is that, people are working more with brokers than they are with big retail banks like Bank of America and Quicken Loans. And are you seeing that on your end, or do you still see a pretty big mix of people that are just going to your generic lender? And
boy, when we get somebody that is looking to go with one of the big banks, we do our best to try and talk them out of going with one of the big banks. We've had, I mean, I can't even count the number of clients where we're helping them as the buyer and they're qualified with one of the bigger banks, your Bank of America's, Chase, Quicken, where the listing agent says, we're not going to accept your offer because of the bank that you're pre-qualified with.
Wow.
Because so many people have had such bad experiences with them in terms of delays, having to extend close of escrows, and just they're not good at what they do.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're just a number to them. Yeah. And they've got thousands and thousands of mortgages that they're working on, and you call in and you're talking to a different person every time that doesn't know your scenario. I read an article where there was one wholesale lender that made the top 10 lenders for originators in the country, and their market share, or their originations, went up by 40% last year, and every other lender went down an average of over 10%. And I think that just speaks to, when you're purchasing a home, people want their hand held.
Absolutely.
People want it's more of a complicated transaction than refinance. And with the market shifting more to purchase as rates were going up, people want to work on the broker side and work with somebody that's going to take care of them, and that they're going to be able to call and talk to and have one point of contact, and they know that they're only dealing with a few loans, and they're going to make sure that it's done right and done on time and get you into a house. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot to be said about going with somebody smaller. Your fees tend to be less in a lot of those cases. You guys have access to a lot more loan programs than your traditional banks do, and you provide a much higher level of service than those banks do. And you mentioned it before, the call center. I hate having to call in and explain who I am, what I need every single time to somebody different. And that when you call into a lot of these big banks, that's what you're dealing with. Yeah. So the last thing I want to kind of touch on in terms of the housing market is recently numbers came out that the delinquency rate or people who are in danger of going to foreclosure, the foreclosure rate this is where I got the 2006 from, is the lowest it's been since 2006.
Wow.
So only 4% of mortgages on a national level are in some form of delinquency. So that is pre-recession numbers. And that is also taking into consideration all the people who have been displaced recently from wildfires, floods, hurricanes. So that number could even be lower if you were to remove some of those people from the equation. Wow. So that's one of the things, one of the largest indicators, I think, that separates where we're at today versus where we were at pre-recession is nobody's desperate. You don't have all these people lined up and delinquent on their mortgages. You have people, I think it's in the trillions of dollars worth of equity in the United States right now. So we're in a really strong, healthy housing market, which is great. The last thing I want to touch on is there's a few scams.
Second last thing.
Second to last thing, yeah. A few scams out there in the real estate world right now that I just want to bring to light and make people aware of. There are real estate agents who are there are people who are posing as real estate agents for rental properties to try and scam tenants out of security deposits. They are taking either old properties that had been listed, they're copying them from places like Zillow and posting them on Craigslist, and cheating people out of money. They think that they're going in to rent this home, and they're dealing with the real estate agent or the owner of the property in some cases, and they just take their money and then disappear.
Wow.
So some things that people can do to avoid falling to prey are renters can actually meet the landlord in person. I definitely advise that they do a quick Google search to confirm the owner of the property that they want to rent, and avoid giving security deposits in cash, because when you do that, you kind of lose
the paper trail.
The paper trail, absolutely. And the other thing that we're noticing in the real estate market too, that's not necessarily a scam, but a lot of telemarketer calls right now saying they're often voice recordings, and they blanket a neighborhood saying, I've got buyers who are interested in your home, or I just sold your neighbor's home down the street for this. Are you interested in selling? Those aren't necessarily scams, but they are phishing. They are trying to get you to sell your property and at usually super discounted prices. So I would recommend, if you are getting any of those phone calls and they're super annoying, I'm getting them too. Make sure you're on the national do not call list. If somebody calls you and makes you a real legitimate offer and you have questions, definitely reach out to me. I can do a market analysis, make sure you're getting a good deal. So just be wary of some of those things.
Okay.
Yeah. So anything else to add?
I think that's it.
I think that's it. All right. Well, this was our January market update. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next month.